Hello, I'm Janessa. Welcome to my channel and welcome to the video where we are going to dive into the astrology of February 2025. There's a lot happening this month. We have 3 planets changing signs, 2 planets stationing direct, a full moon in Leo, a new moon in Pisces, and a lot of other events sprinkled between. I've put together a calendar of all of the astrological events of the month so you can easily reference it, look at your own calendar, see what's going on in your life, and explore how you can apply these transits and understand how to work with these energies with what you have specifically in navigating this month, February 2025. The month kicks off on February 1st with Venus conjunct Neptune, and the North Node is close by in the sign of Pisces. While this kind of transit can be experienced as something a little more positive, since Venus is a benefic, representing love and relationships and what we value, sometimes our financial resources and other kinds of resources, we also have Neptunian qualities, which are going to be more around illusion, fantasy, dreams. Sometimes both of these planets can also be associated with the arts. And that's why a positive interpretation of this conjunction is something that is really going to help expand your sense of dreams, your vision potentially for what you want. Being able to access different parts of your imagination and play with these different energies that you're going to see outside yourself, as well as potentially connect inside yourself. What can be challenging about this type of transit, though, with Venus conjunct Neptune, is that we sometimes project a bit. Like if you even think of the art of filmmaking, right? We're projecting an image onto a screen. And when that happens in our relationships, when we're projecting onto people, we're not always looking at them as a whole person. We're hyper-focusing on one aspect that then is blown up out of proportion potentially. So it can lead to this creation of illusions potentially, or a sense of confusion of not knowing what is really up or down in a relationship. Of course, how this plays out will depend on where Pisces is in your chart, the house specifically that it's associated with. You could also see where Venus is located in your birth chart, because if it's not in the sign of Pisces, it's possible that themes from that sign and that house could be brought into this Venus and Neptune conjunction in the sign of Pisces on February 1st. We then get to a series of events that are going to be happening February 3rd and 4th. There's a lot, so let's break it down here. On February 3rd, we have Mercury in Aquarius trine Jupiter retrograde in Gemini, and the next day we have Jupiter stationing direct in Gemini and Venus moving into the sign of Aries. If we focus on Mercury and Jupiter first, because this sets the stage in a way before Jupiter stationing direct the next day. A trine is sometimes thought of as a positive aspect, but it really depends on how it's interacting with different parts of your chart. Essentially, a trine is an opening of energy, a new flood or flow of information. And because Jupiter is still retrograde, it's possible that one could experience a bit of information overload if not prepared to handle a lot coming in. So it can bring up themes of processing information, but also how to communicate, how to appropriately speak to something that you're experiencing in these areas of your chart, Aquarius and Gemini. And because Mercury rules movement, it could also impact the way that you move even through your physical space, or if you're traveling at this point. As I said, this sets the stage. In some ways, it's like a final action, a final event before Jupiter stations direct in Gemini, where it's been in retrograde for a while. So we could experience that shift where in that area of your life, wherever Gemini is, there's been more of an introspective experience, maybe a slowing down or a shift in pace. But with Jupiter stationing direct, that means there's going to now be some forward momentum in that area of life. And because Gemini is ruled by Mercury, that's why this trine with Mercury the day before is so important to pay attention to. Once again, it brings up themes of communication and movement and networks of things and people and places potentially. Now, this is going to be influenced, of course, by Venus moving into the sign of Aries, which to me, it's interesting, this image of this spark igniting. Pay attention to what happens around these days as Venus begins her first initiatory movement into the sign of Aries, because we will be experiencing a Venus retrograde in Aries and Pisces in the near future. And often the retrograde period is not just activated around the stationing retrograde and stationing direct dates. It's part of an actual bigger chapter. As soon as that planet moves into that sign, we often start to see experiences, messages, little hints at what is to come as we build up closer and closer and closer to that retrograde experience. But we'll return to that at a later date. Right now, let's come back to February. We'll have a couple days, almost like a processing period of these quick events, these 3 events that I just mentioned, February 3rd and 4th. And then that gets us to Friday, February 7th, when Venus is going to be forming a sextile with Pluto in the sign of Aquarius. Venus, of course, will have just moved into Aries, so this is another important data point to keep in mind. Pluto brings up these energies that are very intense, sometimes even obsessive in nature. And a sextile is often an opportunity that presents itself. The invitation could be to follow some sort of desire that's coming up for you, but always keep in mind that Pluto is a very powerful planet. In fact, it does suggest sometimes power dynamics or power differentials, and it is a deeply transformative planet. And this is where we are always presented with a choice. Do we dive into the underworld journey? That's up for you to determine for yourself. We move into the next week where once again, there's a quick series of astrological events. And whenever this happens, it can be a little more challenging to discern what exactly is creating energies or how we're experiencing things in our lives, because it's almost like there are multiple layers that are happening at once. For example, on February 9th, we have Mercury conjunct the Sun in Aquarius, and on the same day, we have Mars trine Saturn. Mars will still be in retrograde in Cancer, and Saturn is in Pisces. Mercury conjunct the Sun is going to bring communication and movement of ideas and people and things into focus in some way in our lives. But when planets are very close to the Sun, we consider them combust. And what that means is it's almost like the light of the sun obscures anything related to that planet. I'll give you an example. When you turn up the exposure of an image, you're essentially washing out all of the contrast that you can see there. That can represent this quality that we can experience when a planet is coming into a conjunction with the sun, especially when it's a faster moving inner planet such as Mercury. What's interesting about the Mars and Saturn trine, though, in combination with this, is that with this element of these water signs coming into play, we have Mars, the planet of action, Saturn, more a planet of structure and containment. We can leverage these energies to channel emotion appropriately, to contain emotion and our emotional responses appropriately. Maybe there's some sort of measured action that you can take from more of an intuitive, creative place. And it's important to find ways to remain grounded still in our sense of self, especially because the events the following days include a couple configurations with Uranus. We have Mercury in Aquarius square Uranus in Taurus on February 10th, followed by the Sun in Aquarius square Uranus in Taurus on February 11th. Uranus brings in an element of the unexpected or the untraditional or unconventional, and it introduces this element of unexpected shifts or unexpected changes that, of course, are leading into the culminating event of the full moon in Leo, which is happening opposite Mercury and the Sun, which will have just formed these squares with Uranus. And a square can often present a situation that requires resolution of some kind, our action, our attempt to bring things back into order in some way. As I said, whatever practices you have that help you ground, come back to your body, your sense of self, slow things down, even if there are some emotional charges, especially heading into a full moon, which is more of a culmination of emotional realities and energies. I'll get into the details around this full moon in Leo as well in a separate video, so make sure to hit subscribe, like this video, and stay tuned for more information to come. On Friday, February 14th, we have Mercury moving into the sign of Pisces. This represents a mental shift for many of us, a lot more intuitive, potentially creative, spiritual, or compassionate. And as Mercury moves through this sign, there will also always be the counter opportunity, which is how do we remain compassionate while also being mindful to not bypass, to not ignore, to connect to what is real, what is occurring, and not get lost in a sense of idealism or pure romanticism. A few days later, on February 18th, the sun will move into Pisces as well. This adds another element because the sun is how we see things. And also, when we see things a certain way, sometimes we can become a little over-identified with an identity or with a situation or a person or a cause. Notice what it is like to use that compassionate lens to look at the world, to look at people around you, to keep your heart open to different perspectives and possibilities. And with Saturn still in Pisces, lean into the fact that you get to have preferences and boundaries as well. In order to truly be compassionate with others, we need to have our own sense of self and containment, because enmeshment is not compassionate to ourselves or to others. On February 20th, we have Mercury in Pisces forming a square with Jupiter, which is now direct in the sign of Gemini. This is interesting because, as I mentioned, on February 3rd, we had Mercury trine Jupiter, but Jupiter was still retrograde and Mercury had not yet moved into the sign of Pisces. So although Mercury's in a different sign now, we can potentially connect these events and understand that whatever opening was created earlier in the month, there might be something now with this square that's coming to a head. Again, it's something that needs to be addressed or resolved. And with Jupiter, the great benefic, moving forward, we have the opportunity to see what is happening as something that could potentially fuel our growth over time, even if it's difficult in the moment itself. On February 23rd, we have Mercury in Pisces forming a trine with Mars retrograde in Cancer just before Mars stations direct. This is a lot happening on one day and also has this pattern of Mercury delivering some sort of information or message right before Mars shifts and starts moving forward again after it stations direct. So pay attention to the hints, to the information, to the messages, so you can take that in, especially with Mars moving into more of a direct path and energy. There could be a feeling of a lot of energy. And with Cancer having more of an emotional quality, this presents the invitation to pay attention to where are these impulses coming from for action. Because especially when something's been slowed down, clamped down, maybe contained, or in more of a backward facing, past facing place like Mars has been for a while, especially Mars, because it's a planet associated with drive and courage and energy. There are things we can do to navigate that shift with just a little bit more grace. It's possible to be decisive in our action and our words without being destructive. On February 25th, we have Mercury conjunct Saturn in Pisces, and conjunctions are always some sort of blending of energies. One way to interpret this then is Saturn is providing some sort of structure or containment for thoughts, for our movement, for our progress forward in some way. We also need to be mindful, though, that Saturn's energy can lean in the pessimistic direction. Sometimes we can get lost in negativity bias or feel a little trapped in our own self-doubt. So this is an opportunity to be very disciplined with our thoughts and our thought work, so we can work with the power of our thoughts for our growth and for our advantage, rather than our self-sabotage. Finally, we're at the end of the month. The last couple of events on February 27th, we have the new moon in Pisces, and we have Mercury in Pisces sextile Uranus in Taurus. I will also dive into this new moon in Pisces in a separate video, but a little preview of some of the themes to keep in mind is with Pisces, as we've talked about, there is an invitation into more of our creative, intuitive side. And when we're in a creative process, there is a sense of play with surrender and letting go, not having to control everything or contain everything, to work with our sense of something that's much bigger than ourselves. So this can be a time with the new moon to start new projects or set an intention that's aligned with that kind of experience. And with Mercury forming a sextile with Uranus, it also introduces the Uranian qualities of something maybe you didn't anticipate. Once again, unexpected, or perhaps counterculture or revolutionary or rebellious in some way. It can be interesting to tap into our thoughts around what we really want to experience in life, even if it is in contrast to the norm. And the key to making that reality is staying connected to the practical steps of implementation and how to turn our dreams and our visions into something that is actually real for us. Thank you so much for connecting. I hope this was helpful, giving you a little preview of the astrology in February 2025. If you enjoyed this content, please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and we will connect again soon.